Hey there everyone, this is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com, and we're continuing in this video series Ableton Live advanced tips to help boost your creativity. In this video, we're going to spend time talking about MIDI effects and how some of them can be really useful in creating some more creative momentum in your projects. So let's dive right in. All right, let's head over to the MIDI effects folder here on the left side of the browser, and let's focus our attention on the Arpeggiator. Now, let's go ahead and create a MIDI track. I'm going to right click, create MIDI track, and drag and drop the Arpeggiator right on there. Now notice that the MIDI effects will affect only MIDI tracks. I know that's self-explanatory, but they will alter and change the input of any MIDI data, as well as change or alter the effects of MIDI data going out or being received or sent out. So we have the MIDI, the Arpeggiator there. Let's choose an instrument here, analog, so that the Arpeggiator can affect the analog. And now when we go ahead and trigger the analog here, the Arpeggiator is arpeggiating the analog. I'll just go ahead and bring the frequency filter down. All right, now some pretty basic stuff here with the Arpeggiator. It's very straightforward. You have the rate in which it's arpeggiating. Right now it's set to every 8th note, and this is all depending on the tempo of your project. And then the gate determines the release or transition from one note to the next. So right now I'm only triggering one note with this Arpeggiator, but if I went ahead and triggered multiple notes, it's going to change or play in that interval. And depending on the gate, the low short gate determines a more staccato, a shorter release from each note. The longer gate, more legato, and so forth. Now, just a couple things to keep in mind. I'm not going to go too in depth with each of the parameters here. I want to show a couple cool things that you can use this Arpeggiator with that'll kind of boost some creativity here. One thing to keep in mind is we have the steps, and this is going to determine, this is really chained or linked up with the distance. Right now, we're going about 12 semitones up, a whole octave. So that means that when you press the Arpeggiator and you have the step set to 1, it's going to do one step an octave higher. So if we put 3 steps, that means it's going to go 3 octaves higher. And so on and so on. All right. Now, normally what we did earlier in this video series, we talked about creating instrument racks or creating racks where you can layer multiple different types of effects and things like that. You could do the same thing here with all the MIDI devices too by just right-clicking and choosing a group. But for the sake of just really easily understanding how this is going to work, I won't be doing that. I'm going to go and add another Arpeggiator right after this first Arpeggiator. Say what? Yeah, so 2 or 3, you can have as many Arpeggiator MIDI effects as you want. But having multiple Arpeggiators is really cool because then you could do something that kind of just normally you wouldn't be able to do with just one simple Arpeggiator. So for instance, we can have one set at a specific rate and then another one at another rate. Now what this is doing, this is going to actually affect the already arpeggiated notes. So if we have, let's say, a chord, a triad, 3 notes, we can set the first rate and then alter that. And you can go ahead and now have the steps on this one. Now here's the effect without the second Arpeggiator. So we're taking those arpeggiated notes and then we're adding more arpeggiated to that. So we can get this really cool little fast little chip type sound. And then you can go ahead and alter that by changing some of the actual patterns or the style of the Arpeggiator. So right now it's set to up, meaning that it's going to go from the lowest note in your of the notes that you're playing all the way up. So it'll work down to up. But here we can just go up and then down, or let's try converge and see what that does. So you can have multiple different styles triggering each other, and that's something I thought was kind of cool. Normally, this actually happened to me by accident by double clicking the Arpeggiator, and then I added another one. I was like, well, what would happen if you just double arpeggiated stuff? So Now, normally when you're sequencing, if you hit record, you're really just inputting. Now I just put three notes down, but what tends to happen is we have only the 3 notes here, and if we bypass the arpeggiator, we're only going to hear those 3 notes played. So I'll bypass both of these. But with both arpeggiators, they're being altered by the arpeggiator. Now what we can do is send the output of this so that we can actually capture that cool arpeggiated pattern. We can create a blank MIDI track, and we could receive the input. See how it says all ins, meaning that it's receiving input from either my MIDI controllers, my computer keyboard. But what we want to do is we want to receive input from track 2 analog. That's the track that we have here. And what we're going to do is we're going to just simply leave it the way it is, so that when we press play, this is going to receive the arpeggiated pattern. So I'll go ahead and record this onto a clip. So it actually inputted or recorded the arpeggiated pattern. So now I can put any instrument on here, let's say Collision or any plugin, and it will play. So this is cool to really capture some of the performances, and then going in here and doing some, minor adjustments or tweaks and things like that. So that's how you can send some of the cool patterns that you might be creating with the arpeggiators onto another track, so that then once you're in here, you could do things and take advantage of, let's say, slowing the track down or slowing the MIDI performance by 2, halftime, or making it twice as fast. And then you can reverse the notes by just hitting the reverse here. That's basically the same thing as going down. And then you can invert them. So a lot of cool things there that you can do by experimenting. And that's just one way to send the MIDI output that's being changed and the parameters that are being changed with the arpeggiators over to a new MIDI track to capture that performance. Now, arpeggiators are also helpful in drum programming situations. So for instance, here we have a drum rack loaded with some sounds, and I'm going to use an arpeggiator and drag and drop that onto this hi-hat. Now, since it's a MIDI device, dropping it on a device just simply puts it to the left of it, because it's changing the information before it triggers the device or that instrument. So now, just by actually holding that button down, I'm able to trigger this sound repeatedly. And I could change the rate here. So what that means is that I can just, with one note being pressed down, we can go ahead and alter and change the rate. Now, there's plenty of ways you can implement that. We would just go ahead and draw that one note, hit the legato, so that it just plays throughout the whole thing. And then we would go ahead and change the parameter. So you would go in here and show automation, and you could go ahead and change the parameter here, or actually within the clip as well. So you would go in here and arpeggiator, and that's the sync rate. So this is where you would actually go ahead and say, for this part, I want a 30-second note, and let's go ahead and trigger that. And then you would change this pattern here, let's say every 16th note. Now, personally, I don't like using it for that purpose, because it just seems a little bit more complicated when I'd rather just draw in the actual changing of the timing here. But what's cool about having the arpeggiator here is that now we can make multiple cells. So let me just go somewhere over here. Let me actually just take this hi-hat and move it somewhere over here. So what we can do is we can now have this one sound staying with this arpeggiator pattern, maybe set to a 8th note, and then we can go ahead and create a copy of that. And then this one here would be, let's say, a 30-second note, and then we can do the same thing over here, and this will be maybe just like a 64th note. And the cool thing is, we can remember that step thing that we talked about. We can now go ahead a whole let's say distance, instead of going up, let's go down a couple steps, or a couple semitones is what I'm saying. So you can do all these really cool things, but now it's just about inputting that one note. So for instance, here we have all the different notes, and just to categorize it, let's just say that this is going to be 1/8, and we'll rename this to 1/32, and you kind of get the idea. Now that I have these notes here, I can just simply input it, and whenever I want to use it as a fill, so to speak. So I'll have the regular hi-hat. Let's put this on here. Oh, that's right, I moved it. But let's say we would just draw that note in, and then it would just immediately jump to that fill there. So when we play this, so that's that 30-second arpeggiated note. And then we can switch over to the 8th note and extend that. And so that's a really cool feature and something that you can do in being able to access, you know, different rates and things like that. And this is really helpful if you're performing live too, because then you could just go ahead and trigger a pad that has that specific sample being triggered at a 30-second rate, 30-second note rate, an 8th note rate, and so on. So, you know, let this be the spark of creativity, and you could, you know, go wild with figuring out different cool ways of using this. Now, leaving the arpeggiator, let's focus our attention on the random MIDI effect. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It's going to output a random MIDI note. So if you're just triggering this device with one note, there hasn't been any changes. But the moment we increase the chance, and all I'm doing is pressing that one note, and it's randomly choosing different notes. And if we put the chance at 100%, now, why would you want to use the random plugin on an actual instrument when you're actually just trying to play the right notes corresponding to the notes that you're playing? Well, the random could be really useful in a situation where you might have different slices or individual things that you would want to randomly trigger in, let's say, a sampler or a simpler. So going back to what we did with the drum rack, let's have an empty drum rack here, and let's put the random plugin here. And then what we're gonna do is, let's go ahead and incorporate a sample. So let's say I have a drum break. Let's go to Beat Academy sample pack. All right, we'll drag and drop that in here. So now what we can do is go to the slice mode, and these individual slices are now being available for us to trigger. And then we can use the random to go ahead and let's just set it to 100 for right now. So it's randomly choosing all these individual slices. So now you could go, and the amount of choices, let's say I only want 6 random slices to be chose from. Now we can increase the choices. Let's get 24. Let's get a good wider range of. Now, why is this useful? Now let's combine the arpeggiator right before the random selector. So now this is going to, just by holding that one note down, and depending on the rate, we can have these random slices triggered. So I know it sounds like a mess now, but really what this could be useful for is some really cool glitchy type of effects. And now you could just draw that in by having that one note there. So this is a cool way to actually have maybe a drum break or a vocal. You see where I'm getting at here? You could put the vocal here and do really cool random places. And you could go ahead and just balance out the chance. And you could do all these really cool things here by just adjusting the rate and just press that note again. So it's really, these MIDI effects really become powerful when combining them, because then you start to think a little bit outside the box and start to do some really amazing stuff here. Now, the rest of these are very straightforward. Pitch allows you to go ahead and transpose, and this is probably one of the most helpful plugins that I've used in all of my projects, because let's say I'm working on something and I'm working with a singer-songwriter, or I'm just trying to compose something myself, and they're telling me, hey, this is a little bit too low. Do you mind transposing this up, to semitones? If I have to go in here and grab all the MIDI and then go up, yeah, that might not sound like a big problem if it's just that one clip, but if you're trying to do that throughout the whole project and all multiple different instruments, then I just normally grab a pitch plugin, go up twice, and just copy that onto the track, and then that'll transpose all the MIDI data throughout the whole arrangement, not just that one region. So that's really helpful and probably one of the biggest MIDI effect plugins that I use. Now, as you can see, there are multiple ways that you can be creative with these MIDI effect plugins in Ableton Live. So I'm really curious to hear from you. What are some ways that you've incorporated MIDI effects plugins in your projects? Please let me know in the comment section below. I'm always learning, and I'm really stoked to hear some of these creative ideas that some of you are already implementing. So stay tuned. Subscribe, because we're gonna wrap this series up with a couple more videos, and looking forward to seeing you next time. Take care.